I think we have enough.
Just make sure that
I think we have enough to hand even out.
I'm still kind of on my break now.
And no, they can't take one home for a missing child. Battle of Yorktown! Vice Regal Sellers! Reason! Out! Guard shoulder! Out!
We stand today on the very ground where guns and cannons fired and where men died, some far from their homes, some literally defending their homes, for it was on this day, 200 years ago, April 27th, 1813, that the American military attacked the town of York, and most specifically, right here at Fort York. When the U.S. declared war on Great Britain in 1812, most people thought Upper Canada would be easy prey. But there was an underestimation of our better trained and better led forces with the support from First Nations. After losses at Detroit, Fort Mackinac, and Queenston Heights, the Americans decided to target York, hoping to capture warships and dominate Lake Ontario. In charge of York's defense was Major General Roger Hale Sheaffe, who also held the vice-regal role that I hold today. As commander at Fort George, it was Sheaffe who led the British forces to the victory at the Battle of Queenston Heights after Sir Isaac Brock fell on the battlefield. It was also, I should mention, in his vice-regal role, that it was Sheaffe who introduced the very first legislation to provide for wounded and disabled soldiers and their families. In fact, it may be rightly said that the very first legislation in the province to address the entire concept of disability was passed into law by Sir Roger. And it was Sheaffe who led the force at York, comprised of 700 men, half of them militia, ably supported by about 50 First Nations chiefs and warriors. The war with the Americans was in its 11th month when, in the early morning of April 27, 1813, sentries first raised the alarm here at York. 14 American ships began landing men and heavy guns west of the town. In swift defense, chiefs and warriors of the Mississauga and Ojibwe First Nations opened fire from the woods. Grenadiers moved in to try to force the Americans off the beach, but after suffering heavy casualties, they withdrew. When the York militia, summoned from town, failed to arrive, Sheaffe led most of his reserves to head off the Americans. The Glengarry Light Infantry, supported by Grenadiers and the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, formed a defensive line. Upon seeing that his men were greatly outnumbered, Sheaffe ordered a retreat towards the Western Battery. Just then, an explosion, believed to be accidental, rocked the battery, forcing the withdrawal of Sheaffe's remaining men here to Fort York. On the British side, and 320 Americans were lost as well. It was a heavy toll, and there were many, many wounded on both sides. In the ensuing 6-day occupation of York, property was lost, including homes, church, and the library, a printing press destroyed, and government stores seized. The Parliament buildings, Government House, the courthouse, and blockhouse were destroyed, and the mace and other symbols of the parliamentary government were captured. In the chaos of battle and occupation, the town of York lost its innocence, but through that testing, it came of age. Before the battle, loyalties had been divided. Much of the population here was American-born. A good many were loyalists, but others had come because of settlement incentives. Fighting the Americans was like brothers fighting brothers. which is why many historians, I think quite correctly, call this the Civil War of 1812. They also called it a stalemate, but on the contrary, it redefined our identity as Canadians. After the battle, civic institutions were taken less for granted and respected more. Men had fought and died to preserve a particular way of life, and this gave rise to a new and distinctive sense of identity. York became the great city of Toronto. Our province joined the vast dominion of Canada, and today we are Canadians.
Thank you, Your Honour.